Greenwood, a town where nothing much happens. People lived peacefully, children played freely, and neighbors exchanged smiles while mowing their lawns. For as long as anyone could remember, Greenwood had been a place untouched by chaos or danger. But that illusion was about to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. The Pearson family had lived in Greenwood for nearly a decade. John Pearson, a sturdy man in his late 30s, was known around town as the kind of man you could rely on. A builder of homes, a family man. Lisa Pearson, with her soft, nurturing presence, was a beloved second-grade teacher. Their children, Liam and Emma, were well-mannered, bright kids who thrived in the town's small school. To the outside world, they were perfect. But beneath the surface, things were unraveling. No one knew it yet, but the Pearsons were on the brink of disaster. When they disappeared without a trace one cold autumn night, the town would be left questioning how well they really knew their neighbors. John Pearson had always been a man who prided himself on his work ethic. From a young age, he had taken responsibility for everything: his family, his business, his home. In Greenwood, John was known as a man who could be trusted to get the job done. Whether it was repairing a roof or building a new home from scratch, John's word was his bond. But as his business grew, so did the weight of expectations. The pressure to maintain the image of a successful business owner began to take its toll. His clients were no longer just neighbors. They were wealthy outsiders who had moved to Greenwood, expecting nothing less than perfection. The contracts were bigger, the stakes higher, and John was drowning. It wasn't just the business that was struggling. John had always tried to shield Lisa from his financial troubles, but she was no fool. She could see the tension in his shoulders when he came home, the way he barely spoke at dinner, the sleepless nights spent tossing and turning. She could feel the distance between them growing, even if neither of them wanted to acknowledge it. Lisa tried to talk to John, but he always brushed her off, saying he had everything under control. But in truth, John was desperate. The debt collectors had begun calling more frequently, and the bank was threatening to foreclose on their home if he didn't make a substantial payment soon. Lisa could sense that something was deeply wrong, but John's refusal to let her in left her feeling powerless. She began saving money in secret, tucking away small amounts each month in case things got worse. But she could never have imagined just how much worse things would get. The divide between John and Lisa grew more noticeable with each passing day. John began staying out later, telling Lisa he was meeting clients or working on last-minute projects. But in reality, he was avoiding her. The weight of his financial struggles had grown too heavy, and he didn't know how to face her. He didn't know how to tell her that they were on the brink of losing everything. Lisa, for her part, began to worry that John was keeping more than just financial troubles from her. He had become secretive, evasive. There were days when he would disappear for hours, and when Lisa asked where he had been, his answers were vague, often contradictory. The children noticed it too. Liam, who had always been close to his father, began to ask why John never had time to play catch with him anymore. Emma, sensing the tension between her parents, had become quieter, retreating into her room more often than usual. The perfect family facade was beginning to crack, but no one outside their home could see it yet. As John's financial situation worsened, he found himself drawn deeper into the world of Martin Holt, a lone shark who operated on the fringes of Greenwood's seemingly peaceful community. Holt was known for giving out quick loans to people in desperate situations, but the terms were brutal. Miss a payment and Holt's enforcers would come knocking. John had taken out a substantial loan from Holt months earlier, convinced that he could turn things around and pay it back before things got out of hand. But the business continued to falter, and the payments became harder to make. Holt's men had already visited him twice, issuing thinly veiled threats. John knew that if he didn't come up with the money soon, they would come for him again, and this time they wouldn't be so polite. It was in those sleepless nights that John began to consider the unthinkable. He could sell off what little remained of the business, but that wouldn't be enough to cover the debt. He could ask for help, but his pride wouldn't allow it. And so, he did what so many men in his position have done. He gambled on a risky deal, hoping that one big contract would save him. But the deal fell through, leaving John with nothing. And now, Holt's deadline was looming. It was late on a Friday night when everything came to a head. John had just returned from a meeting with one of Holt's enforcers, and the conversation had not gone well. The man had made it clear that John was out of time. He had two options: pay up or face the consequences. And those consequences would not just affect him, they would affect his family. John walked into the house, his hands trembling, his mind racing. Lisa was waiting for him, her face a mask of concern. She had known something was wrong for a long time, but tonight, she could see that whatever it was worse than she had imagined. They argued. For the first time in months, John told her the truth about the debts, about Holt, about the threats. Lisa was horrified, not just by the danger they were in, but by the fact that John had kept it all from her for so long. But there was no time for recriminations. They had to act, and they had to act fast. Holt's men could show up at any moment, and if they did, there was no telling what they would do. John made a decision. They would leave. They would pack up whatever they could carry and disappear in the middle of the night, starting over somewhere far from Greenwood, far from Holt. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one John could think of. Lisa, still in shock, agreed. She didn't know what else to do. The thought of losing their home, their life in Greenwood, was terrifying, but the thought of staying and facing Holt was even worse. And so they began to pack. By dawn, the Pearsons were gone. Their disappearance was noticed almost immediately. Lisa's absence from work raised alarms, and when John didn't show up for a scheduled meeting, people began to ask questions. Neighbors knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Calls went straight to voicemail. By the end of the day, the police were alerted. Officers were sent to the house to conduct a welfare check. They found the door locked, the house eerily quiet. Inside, everything appeared to be in place. Beds were made, dishes were clean in the sink, toys were neatly put away. There were no signs of a struggle, no sign of forced entry, but also no sign of the Pearsons. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. The first 48 hours after a disappearance are crucial. Detective Sarah Blake, who had been with the Greenwood Police Department for 5 years, was assigned to the case. Sarah was methodical, experienced, and deeply respected by her peers. She had solved some of the toughest cases in larger cities before moving to Greenwood for a quieter life. But something about this case immediately put her on edge. There were no immediate clues, no ransom notes, and no clear indication of foul play. But Sarah had a gut feeling that this wasn't just a family that decided to pack up and leave on a whim. Something darker was at play, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. The first step was to talk to the neighbors. Most of them had only good things to say about the Pearsons. How John was always willing to lend a hand with repairs. How Lisa was a favorite teacher at the local school. How their kids were polite and well-behaved. But as Sarah dug deeper, she began to hear whispers of tension inside the Pearson home. Mrs. Edwards, an elderly neighbor who lived directly across the street, mentioned that she had overheard John and Lisa arguing a few days before their disappearance. It wasn't the first time. Mrs. Edwards, though polite, had a sharp ear for drama, and she had noticed that the Pearsons had been growing distant from each other over the past few months. They were always so close before, Mrs. Edwards said, shaking her head. But lately John seemed stressed, maybe. Lisa looked worried all the time, like she was carrying the weight of the world. Sarah made note of this, but it wasn't enough. The police searched the house again, looking for any clues they might have missed, but everything seemed normal, almost too normal. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the Pearsons hadn't just left on their own. Through a background check on John's business dealings, Sarah discovered something that made her blood run cold. John had taken out a loan from a man named Martin Holt, a known loan shark operating out of Greenwood's underbelly. Holt had a reputation for giving out quick loans at sky-high interest rates, and when people couldn't pay, he sent his enforcers to collect. Sarah knew Holt by reputation, but she had never been able to pin anything serious on him. He was slippery, always operating just within the boundaries of the law. But his enforcers were a different story. They were men with violent pasts, and they had been known to intimidate, sometimes worse, those who couldn't meet their payments. When Sarah tracked down Holt for questioning, he was smug, confident. He denied knowing anything about the Pearsons' disappearance. claiming that John had been behind on his payments but nothing more. As far as Holt was concerned, the family was still alive, just hiding. Sarah didn't buy it. She knew Holt had more information than he was letting on, but without hard evidence, there was little she could do. Still, Holt's name on the list of suspects added a new dimension to the case. John hadn't just been in financial trouble. He had been in deep with dangerous people. The investigation dragged on for weeks with no solid leads. Sarah and her team followed every possible clue, interviewing John's business contacts, checking financial records, canvassing nearby towns, but each lead ended in a frustrating dead end. Rumors began to spread through Greenwood. Some people believed the Pearsons had been killed, their bodies hidden somewhere far from town. Others speculated that John had snapped under the pressure and taken his own family's lives before vanishing himself. Some thought they had fled the country, starting over with new identities. Sarah was haunted by the case. Every night, she would return to her office, poring over the files, trying to find the missing piece of the puzzle. The strain of the investigation was beginning to take its toll on her. She was determined to find answers, but it seemed that the more she searched, the further the truth slipped away. Then, nearly 2 months after the Pearsons had disappeared, Sarah got a call from a gas station attendant in a town several hours away. The man had been reviewing security footage from the night the Pearsons vanished and had noticed something strange. A family matching their description had stopped at the gas station late that night. The footage wasn't clear, but it was enough. The man in the video looked like John, and the woman and children fit the descriptions of Lisa, Liam, and Emma. The man seemed agitated, glancing around nervously as he filled up the car, while the woman and children stayed in the vehicle, looking tense. This was the break Sarah had been waiting for. She immediately dispatched a team to the area, following the trail left by the gas station transaction records. It wasn't long before they found what they had been looking for. A small cabin, rented under a false name, deep in the woods. When they approached the cabin, Sarah's heart raced. The place looked abandoned, but something about it felt off. As her team carefully entered the building, they found the Pearsons, alive but terrified. John had taken his family and fled in the middle of the night, believing that it was the only way to escape Holt's men. He had been planning the escape for weeks, stashing away money and preparing fake documents. He thought they could start over somewhere far away, where Holt wouldn't find them. But the stress of living in hiding had taken its toll on all of them. John was arrested on charges of fraud and attempting to evade his debts. Lisa and the children, though unharmed, were in a state of shock. Their once perfect life had been shattered, and it would take years to rebuild. As they were taken into protective custody, John admitted everything. His debts, his dealings with Holt, and the threats that had driven him to such desperate measures. He had been trying to protect his family, but in the end, his actions had only brought them more pain. John Pearson was sentenced to several years in prison for his crimes. His construction business was dissolved, his assets sold to pay off the remaining debt. Lisa and the children were relocated to a different town, where they could try to rebuild their lives far from the shadow of Greenwood and Martin Holt. But Greenwood was forever changed by the events that had unfolded. The town's once peaceful facade had been shattered, and people spoke in hushed tones about the Pearsons, about the dark secrets that had lurked behind the walls of their seemingly perfect home. For Sarah Blake, the case was a reminder of just how fragile life could be. The Pearsons had seemed like the ideal family, but beneath the surface, there had been cracks. Cracks that, once exposed, led to their downfall. As she stood outside the abandoned house one last time, Sarah couldn't help but wonder. How many other families were hiding secrets behind their closed doors?